Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the news from SABA satellite channel from Marib. Here are tonight's top stories.
Leadership vows firm response to sovereignty violations, raises military readiness.
PLC member Al-Alimi warns Iranian Houthi escalation threatens Yemen and Red Sea security.
And UN Security Council meeting condemns Iranian flights and Houthi threats.
Welcome back. The Presidential Leadership Council, chaired by President Dr. Rashad Al-Alimi, has held a joint meeting with the National Defense Council to address repeated Iranian violations of Yemeni sovereignty and the Houthi terrorist militia's attempts to receive and authorize foreign flights at Sana'a airport. The meeting praised the armed forces for their readiness, discipline, and professionalism in implementing defense measures that thwarted an attempt to impose a new reality by force. It ordered the armed forces and state institutions to maintain the highest levels of readiness and vigilance, warning that any new violation of Yemen's sovereignty, airspace, airports, or other ports of entry would face a firm response under the Constitution and international law. The meeting declared that no foreign aircraft will be allowed to enter or land anywhere in Yemen without the approval of the government, and competent authorities described control over the country's airspace and airports as an exclusive foreign right of the state. The council held the Houthi terrorist militia fully responsible for the escalation, accusing it of rejecting peace initiatives, undermining Yemen's sovereignty, and exploiting civilian suffering for political and military purposes.
It also held the Iranian regime responsible for supporting actions that violate international law and Security Council resolutions. In a strong warning, the meeting said Yemen's armed forces and security agencies would strike with an iron fist against anyone attempting to violate state sovereignty or impose realities by force, while maintaining maximum precautions to protect civilians and their property. The meeting also condemned Houthi attacks against Saudi Arabia and praised the readiness of Saudi armed forces and air defenses in intercepting ballistic missiles and countering the attacks. The PLC and National Defense Council called on the international community, particularly the UN Security Council, to move beyond condemnation to deterrence, enforce international resolutions, and strictly implement sanctions and restrictions on the transfer of weapons and military experts to the Houthi militia. The meeting reaffirmed Yemen's commitment to a just peace, but warned that its pursuit of peace must never be interpreted as permission to violate its sovereignty or impose realities outside the country's constitutional institutions.
The warning over Iran's repeated violations of Yemeni sovereignty has also been taken to London, where member of the Presidential Leadership Council, Dr. Abdullah Al-Alimi, urged stronger international action against repeated Iranian violations of Yemeni sovereignty and the growing threat posed by the Houthi terrorist militia. During talks in London with Sir Alan Campbell, leader of the British House of Commons, Al-Alimi reviewed Yemen's political, security, and economic developments and the government's efforts to achieve a comprehensive and sustainable peace. He said the legitimate government engaged positively in successive peace efforts since 2015, while the Houthi militia repeatedly obstructed settlements and exploited periods of de-escalation to rearm, develop its military capabilities and intensify threats to regional security.
Dr. Abdullah Al-Alimi warned that Iran's continued interference and support for the militia pose a direct threat not only to Yemen's sovereignty, but also to regional and international security and freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. He pointed to the landing of an Iranian aircraft last week and another flight on Monday that headed to Hodeidah after failing to land in Sana'a, describing them as attempts to impose a new reality by force and establish a route outside state sovereignty that could facilitate the transfer of military experts, equipment, and weapons to the militia. Al-Alimi held the Houthi militia and the Iranian regime fully responsible for escalation and its consequences, stressing that the government will take all legitimate political diplomatic, legal, and military measures to protect Yemen's sovereignty, airspace, and ports of entry.
The House of Representatives declared its full support for measures taken by the President of the Presidential Leadership Council and the National Defense Council to defend the country's sovereignty against escalating Iranian and Houthi violations. In a statement, Parliament said it was deeply concerned by repeated and unauthorized flights between Sana'a and Tehran, accusing Iran of supplying the Houthi terrorist militia with weapons, drones, and other military capabilities. The statement said the latest incursions into Yemeni airspace by Iranian aircraft represented a direct act of aggression against national sovereignty and a blatant challenge to international law and United Nations Security Council resolutions. Parliament backed all measures taken by the country's political and defense leadership and called on Yemen's allies and international partners to strengthen support for the government and enable it to deter Iranian Houthi escalation.
And the Shura Council has joined Parliament in backing the political leadership's measures to defend Yemen's sovereignty, further demonstrating unified institutional support for the state's response to Iranian Houthi escalation. In a statement, the Council said protecting Yemen's sovereignty and the unity of its national decision-making is a constitutional responsibility that cannot be compromised, warning that any attempt to impose an unlawful reality or undermine the authority of legitimate state institutions represents a direct threat to national security. The Council backed the decisions and measures taken by President Dr. Rashad Al-Alimi and praised the leadership's responsible handling of the current escalation. It condemned the Houthi terrorist militia for continuing its escalatory policies, rejecting initiatives aimed at easing civilian suffering, and taking unilateral steps that undermine peace efforts. The Council also praised the readiness of the armed forces and the security agencies and expressed confidence in their ability to protect national sovereignty and confront any threat to the state and its institutions.
Political support for the government's response is also widening, with Yemen's major political parties and national groups rallying behind the state and armed forces in defense of the country's sovereignty. In a statement, the National Coalition of Political Parties described the latest Iranian Houthi escalation as a direct act of aggression against Yemen's sovereignty and an attempt to impose a new reality outside legitimate state institutions. It said the escalation demonstrates the Houthi terrorist militia's complete subordination to Iran's exceptionist project at the expense of Yemen's security and stability. It warned that continued escalation and rejection of peace initiatives require an urgent reassessment of the entire political process, saying peace efforts must be not allowed to become a cover of the Houthis to rearm and strengthen their military capabilities. The coalition held Iran and the Houthi militia fully responsible for the escalation and its consequences, warning that the use of Yemeni territory, airspace, airports, and ports to advance Iranian interests threatens Yemen, Arab national security, the wider region, and international navigation through the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb.
Interior Minister Major General Ibrahim Haidan ordered all security units to raise their security and operational readiness to the maximum level amid escalating threats posed by Iran and the Houthi terrorist militia. The minister also ordered stronger coordination and operational integration between security forces, the armed forces, and other relevant agencies to counter threats to national security, civilian safety, regional stability, and international navigation. Haidan said the current situation requires the highest levels of vigilance and operational preparedness, as well as all necessary measures to protect citizens, maintain stability, and strengthen the domestic front. He warned that security forces would respond with full force to anyone attempting to undermine security, create chaos, obstruct state institutions, or exploit the current situation to serve hostile agendas. Haidan said all sectors and departments of the Interior Ministry are at full readiness, with security and operational plans being implemented to address different threats.
The escalating tensions have also reached the United Nations Security Council, where the United Kingdom, the United States, France, and Bahrain delivered strong condemnation of the Houthi militia and Iranian actions, warning that escalating threats undermine Yemen's sovereignty, regional security, and international navigation. Speaking at an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council on Yemen, the four countries reaffirmed support for the country's sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity, while raising serious concerns over unauthorized Iranian flights to Yemeni territory. The United Kingdom condemned in strongest terms Houthi attacks against Saudi Arabia and expressed deep concerns over two Iranian aircraft that landed in Yemen without permission from the legitimate Yemeni authorities, describing the flights as a clear breach of Yemen's sovereignty and international law. The United States delivered another sharp warning, accusing Iran of using the July 3 flight to transport Islamic Revolutionary Guard personnel, including drone and missile experts, in support of Houthi terrorism. Washington described Iran's disregard for Yemen's sovereignty and Security Council resolutions as unacceptable and reaffirmed its support for the Yemeni government against the Iranian-backed Houthi terrorist threat.
France firmly condemned the unauthorized landing of Iranian aircraft in Sana'a on July 3rd and Al Hudaydah on July 13th, saying Iran had undermined Yemen's legitimate authorities and violated international law, accusing Tehran of threatening international peace and security through its support for the Houthis, and demanded an end to all transfers of military equipment to the militia. Bahrain, meanwhile, condemned the Houthi attacks against Saudi Arabia and warned that continued Iranian support for the militia threatens peace and security in Yemen and across the region. The Bahraini representative said Houthi threats have expanded to include the possible closure of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, posing a direct danger to international trade, maritime security, and freedom of navigation. Greece, the A3 group, Panama, Denmark, Latvia, Pakistan, and Colombia also expressed their condemnation of repeated Iranian breaches of international laws and disregarded the Security Council's resolutions.
Yemen, which requested the Emergency Security Council meeting, told the Council that unauthorized Iranian flights represent far more than isolated violations of its airspace, warning that they constitute a dangerous attempt to impose a new military and political reality outside legitimate state institutions. Addressing the meeting, Yemen's representative Ambassador Abdullah Saadi said unauthorized Iranian flights into airports under Houthi control constitute a grave violation of Yemen's sovereignty and a direct challenge to international law and Security Council resolutions. He said documented information available to the government indicate that one flight was not purely civilian but carried personnel, expertise, and military and dual-use equipment.
Ambassador Saadi said Yemeni forces had taken defensive measures against a second unauthorized Iranian flight, but the government chose not to broaden the confrontation to protect civilian lives and avoid being drawn into a wider regional conflict. He called on the Security Council to explicitly condemn the unauthorized flights, investigate possible transfers of military personnel and equipment, strictly enforce resolutions 2140 and 2216, and prevent further flights into Yemen without government approval. Saadi warned that failure to act would send a dangerous message that state sovereignty can be violated, civilian aviation exploited for military purposes, and Security Council resolutions circumvented without accountability.
Leading Arab and Islamic organizations have strongly condemned the Houthi militia's ballistic missile attacks targeting southern Saudi Arabia, expressing full solidarity with the kingdom and calling for firm international action against the perpetrators. The Arab Parliament, the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the Arab Interior Ministers' Council described the attacks as a dangerous escalation and a serious violation of international law that threatens Saudi Arabia's security and wider regional stability. They reaffirmed their full support for all measures taken by Saudi Arabia to protect its sovereignty, citizens, territory, and vital infrastructure, stressing that the kingdom's security is an integral part of Arab national security. The organizations warned that continued hurt escalation undermines regional and international efforts to achieve stability and reach a comprehensive political settlement to the conflict in Yemen.
Yemen and Libya discussed ways to strengthen bilateral cooperation in industry, mining and technology. Minister of Industry and Trade Mohammed Al-Ashwal met with his Libyan counterpart, Mohammed Abdel Gadir, on the sidelines of the 29th General Assembly of the Arab Industrial Development, Standardization and Mining Organization hosted by Libya. The two ministers discussed exchanging technical expertise, transferring knowledge, training human resources, and exploring promising investment opportunities in the industrial sector. They also stressed the importance of coordinating positions with the Arab Organization to advance sustainable development and promote greater Arab economic integration amid current economic challenges.
Minister of Planning and International Cooperation Farah Al-Zoba discussed with the acting of United Nations President and Humanitarian Coordinator in Yemen, Laurent Bouquera, ways to strengthen coordination and support the country's upcoming development priorities. Al-Zoba stressed the government's central role in setting humanitarian and development priorities and called for international interventions to align with Yemen's national 2029-2027 development plan, which is currently under preparation. She also urged United Nations agencies and international NGOs to share project data with the ministry as part of efforts to establish a unified national information system for development and humanitarian activities. Citing decline in international funding and its impact on essential services, particularly healthcare, Al-Zoba called for closer coordination to direct available resources toward the most urgent needs. For his part, Bouquera reaffirmed the United Nations' commitment to strengthen its partnership with the Yemeni government and supporting the country's development and humanitarian priorities.
In Marib, a seminar called for a stronger regional cooperation to confront cross-border threats and protect national security and shared interests, organized by the Yemen Scholars Outreach Program under the theme Yemen and Saudi Arabia, an enduring partnership and unity of positions and destiny. The seminar highlighted the deep historical ties between the two countries and stressed that their security is fundamental to regional stability. Participants called for strengthening the strategic partnership between Yemen and Saudi Arabia at all levels to counter security and terrorist threats, confront Iran's expansionist agenda in Yemen and the wider region, and protect maritime routes, vital infrastructure, and shared interests. The seminar also praised Saudi Arabia's continued support for Yemen's legitimate government and state institutions, as well as its contribution to the country's security, stability, territorial unity, economy, and development. That's all for tonight. Thank you for watching.
And have a good time.